Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted your whole life? Someone who shared your blood? I'm Mark, and what I'm about to tell you is not just a story about money or family. It's about betrayal, survival, and a kind of justice that doesn't come from a courtroom, but from fighting back when no one expects you to. Before I dive in and tell you how my own brother tried to erase me from our family legacy, and how I turned the tables in a way he never saw coming, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment if you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours, and subscribe to hear more real stories like this one. Now imagine this: two brothers raised under the same roof, eating the same meals, taught the same lessons, but living two completely different lives under the surface. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where everybody knows your name and your mistakes. My parents, Michael and Susan, owned a modest auto repair shop. Nothing fancy, no marble floors or luxury vacations, just honest work, greasy hands, and a solid reputation built over decades. After Mom passed away when I was 15, it was just Dad, me, and my older brother, Eric. Eric was everything a small-town parent could want. The high school quarterback, the prom king, the golden boy everyone thought would inherit Dad's business one day. Me? I was the kid in the background, changing oil and keeping the books, more comfortable with a wrench or a calculator than a football. Dad loved us both, at least I thought he did, but deep down, I always knew he counted on me in ways he couldn't count on Eric. Eric had a habit of chasing shortcuts. If life was a highway, he was the guy swerving between lanes looking for the fastest route. I was the one reading the road signs, taking the bumps, and learning patience the hard way. Still, I never imagined that when Dad was gone, Eric would try to strip me of the only thing he ever truly trusted me with. Not just the business, not just the house we grew up in, but the legacy my father built with his bare hands. And the worst part? He didn't just want to take it, he wanted to bury me in the process. But like Dad always said, pressure doesn't just break you, it makes diamonds, if you're strong enough to stand the heat. And that's exactly what I did. Growing up, our house was nothing special. 3 bedrooms, a sagging porch swing, and a driveway stained with motor oil. It wasn't much, but it was home. The repair shop was just a block away, a squat brick building with faded paint and the words Michael's Auto Repair in peeling letters above the garage bay. Dad built it with his own 2 hands after he got back from the army. Said he wanted something real, something nobody could take away from him. As kids, Eric and I would spend hours there. Eric mostly goofed off, tossing footballs over the rusted trucks in the lot. I'd hang around Dad, handing him tools and soaking up everything he said about engines, about life. Engines are like people, Dad would tell me, wiping grease from his hands. You treat 'em right, keep 'em running smooth. Ignore 'em too long, they'll break down on you when you need 'em most. I didn't realize it back then, but he wasn't just teaching me about cars. He was teaching me about responsibility, loyalty, about trust. Eric? He had other plans. In high school, he was the guy everybody wanted to be. Captain of the football team, homecoming king, you name it. Teachers bent over backward for him, and girls lined up to date him. Meanwhile, I stayed under the radar, quietly getting straight A's, working part-time at the shop, and dreaming about someday turning Dad's little business into something bigger. I didn't want fame, I wanted respect. The kind you earn, not the kind you're handed because you're good-looking or good at throwing a ball. The older we got, the more obvious it became that Eric didn't care about the shop. He barely showed up, even when Dad asked for help. He was too busy chasing quick money schemes and dead-end jobs. But to everyone else, the neighbors, our old teachers, even Dad's friends, Eric was still the golden boy. I guess that's the thing about small towns. Reputations are sticky, even when they stop being true. Dad saw it, though. In the quiet moments, when it was just the 2 of us in the garage late at night, he'd pat me on the back, his hand heavy with pride. "You're the one holding it all together, Mark," he'd say. "When the time comes, this place is yours. You've earned it." Those words were a lighthouse for me, shining through all the storms Eric stirred up. But the thing about lighthouses is, they can't stop the waves, they can only show you where the rocks are. And when Dad passed, I found out just how sharp those rocks could be. Dad had always been the strongest man I knew, not in a bodybuilder way, but in a quiet, steady way. He was the kind of man who could lift an engine block without blinking and fix a broken axle with a piece of wire and sheer stubbornness. So when he got sick, it hit harder than anything else ever had. It started small, missed steps, forgotten tools, confusion that wasn't like him. At first he waved it off. Just tired, he'd say, brushing away our concern like dust from his coveralls. But it wasn't just tiredness. By the time he finally agreed to see a doctor, it was too late. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. They gave him 6 months. He lasted 5 brutal, bone-thin months where the strongest man I'd ever known turned into a shadow, sitting in a recliner, too weak to lift a coffee mug. Eric visited a few times, mostly when he couldn't find a way to get out of it. He'd show up with his fake smile and empty promises, staying just long enough to look good, then disappearing again to God knows where. Meanwhile, I was there. Every day, driving Dad to appointments, sitting with him through chemo sessions, making him laugh when the pain was too much for words. Toward the end, we had long talks, or rather Dad talked and I listened. He told me stories I'd never heard before, about his own father, about the war, about mistakes he wished he could take back. And one night when the autumn leaves were rattling against the window and the house smelled like the Vicks vapor rub he rubbed on his chest to help him breathe, he looked at me and said, "Mark, I'm leaving the shop and the house to you. I've already taken care of it." I started to protest. "What about Eric?" But he shook his head, weak but firm. "Eric's not cut out for this life. He's got dreams somewhere else, even if he doesn't know what they are. You're the one who stayed. You're the one who cared." He paused, catching his breath, and then said something I'll never forget. "Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters." 3 days later, Dad was gone. We buried him on a windy Tuesday, under a sky so grey it looked like it might fall on us. The whole town came out, men in oil-stained coveralls, women with faces lined from years of worry. Even Eric managed to show up, standing stiff and solemn at the edge of the crowd, sunglasses hiding his eyes. As they lowered the casket, I felt a hole open inside me, like the ground had swallowed more than just a coffin. It had swallowed my anchor. But I didn't realize then, not fully, that the real storm was only just beginning. A week after the funeral, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the same table where Dad used to spread out blueprints and car manuals, sipping cheap coffee from a chipped mug. I could still smell the faint mix of motor oil and pine cleaner that clung to every inch of the house. It was quiet, too quiet. Then the doorbell rang. When I opened the door, there stood Mr. Henley, our family's lawyer, in a wrinkled grey suit that looked like it had seen better days, clutching a worn leather briefcase. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mark," he said, his voice low and careful, like he was stepping through a minefield. "Your father left instructions. It's time to read the will." We sat down in the living room. Eric showed up 20 minutes late, wearing a button-down shirt that still had the dry cleaner's tag on it, acting like he was doing the whole world a favor by being there. Mr. Henley cleared his throat and got straight to it. Dad had left everything to me. The shop, the house, the tools, the land. Everything. Eric blinked, stunned. He looked at me, then at Mr. Henley, like waiting for a punchline that never came. "There must be a mistake," Eric said, his voice tight. "Dad wouldn't just leave me out like that." Mr. Henley shook his head. "It's very clear. Your father made these arrangements a year ago. He was of sound mind and everything was properly witnessed and notarized." Eric sat back in the worn leather chair, his jaw tight, his eyes narrow. "Well, maybe Mark manipulated him, took advantage of him when he was sick." I clenched my fists under the table, but stayed silent. Mr. Henley closed the folder slowly. "I can assure you, Eric, there's no indication of anything improper. Your father made his wishes very clear." Eric's face flushed a deep, angry red. He pushed back his chair, the legs scraping harshly against the hardwood floor. "This isn't over," he snapped, storming out the door without another word. I sat there for a moment after he left, the house swallowing the noise back into silence. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't even about the shop or the house. It was about Dad, about everything he had built, everything he had trusted me to protect. And deep down I knew Eric wouldn't let it go. I just didn't realize how far he was willing to go to take it away from me. For a couple of days it was quiet, too quiet. Eric didn't call, didn't text. No surprise there. He wasn't exactly the type to talk things through. He was more like a thunderstorm. You didn't hear a warning, you just saw the flash and felt the hit. I spent those days sorting through Dad's things, trying to keep myself busy, cleaning out the shop, organizing the tools the way he liked them, fixing up the house. It felt wrong to move on, but it felt even worse to sit still. Then, out of nowhere, Eric showed up at the shop. I was under the hood of a '94 Chevy when I heard the unmistakable slam of a car door. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped out, heart already pounding. Eric leaned against his beat-up SUV like he owned the place, arms crossed, wearing that same smug smile he used to have in high school, the one that said he always got what he wanted. "We need to talk," he said. I didn't move. "We are talking." He pushed off the car and walked toward me. "Look, this whole situation, it's messed up. Dad wasn't thinking straight. He was sick, Mark. He didn't know what he was doing." I felt my jaw clench. Dad knew exactly what he was doing. Eric shook his head like he was the one being reasonable. "Come on, man. You and I both know the shop's not worth much. Split it. Sell it. We can both walk away with some cash and move on." I folded my arms. Dad didn't want it sold. He wanted it to stay in the family. He wanted me to keep it running. Eric laughed, a short, bitter sound. "Yeah, well, maybe Dad didn't see things too clearly at the end." There it was, the first crack in the mask. "Not happening," I said, steady and calm. "It's mine." Dad's will was clear. For a second, Eric's face hardened, a flash of something dark behind his eyes, but then he forced another smile. "Think about it," he said, backing away. "It'd be a shame if things got ugly." He didn't wait for a reply, just turned and got back into his SUV, tires crunching on the gravel as he sped off. I stood there for a long time, staring after him, feeling the weight of something heavy settle on my chest. I knew Eric. I knew how he operated. And that wasn't a suggestion. It was a threat. A few days after that little chat at the shop, Eric started showing up more often. At first, it was under the pretense of being helpful. He'd drop by with coffee, black, the way Dad liked it, even though Eric never took a sip himself. He'd linger around offering to lend a hand with small repairs or inventory, but it was fake, all of it. Eric didn't know the first thing about running a shop. He didn't even know the difference between a carburetor and a camshaft. What he was really doing was sizing things up, poking around, figuring out what he could take, what he could twist. One afternoon, as I was restocking parts, he wandered into Dad's old office, leaning on the battered oak desk like he owned it. "You know," he started casually, "this place isn't worth the headache. You're going to sink all your time and money into it and what? End up like Dad, greasy hands, bad back and barely scraping by." I didn't even look up. "That was good enough for Dad. It's good enough for me." Eric chuckled, low and dismissive. "Yeah, well, you're thinking small. I got people who'd buy this dump in a heartbeat, developers. They're snapping up properties all over town. You could walk away with a fat check. Finally get yourself a real life." I set the box down and turned to face him. "I have a real life, one Dad was proud of." He shrugged. "Suit yourself. Just remember, when the bank comes calling or the roof caves in, don't say I didn't offer you a way out." There was something about the way he said it, so sure, so smug, that made my skin crawl. A week later, I found out why. I got a letter from the county clerk's office, some paperwork Eric had filed, a petition to contest the will. He wasn't offering help. He was laying the groundwork to take everything. When I first opened that envelope from the county clerk's office, I felt like the floor dropped out from under me. Eric wasn't just contesting the will. He was accusing me of manipulating Dad in his final days. According to the papers, I had unduly influenced our father when he was no longer of sound mind, convincing him to rewrite the will and cut Eric out unfairly. It was like being sucker-punched by someone you thought you knew. He didn't even have the guts to warn me it was coming, just blindsided me, like it was some business transaction he was trying to close. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time, the letter crumpled in my hands, trying to figure out what to do next. I could still see Dad's handwriting on the margins of the auto manual stacked on the counter, his coffee mug still sitting by the sink. He had trusted me to carry this on, and now Eric was trying to smear his memory and drag me down with him. I called Mr. Henley, the lawyer, and laid it all out. He wasn't surprised. "Mark," he said, his voice heavy with experience, "family brings out the best in people, and the worst. Contesting a will isn't easy, but if Eric's serious, this could get messy." "Can he win?" I asked. "Not if the will is solid, and from everything I've seen, it is." Your father was clear and lucid when he made his decisions. But, he added, this town is small. Reputations matter. If Eric starts planting seeds in the right ears, he doesn't have to win the case to hurt you. He just has to make people doubt you. And that was the real danger. In a place like ours, where everyone knew everyone's business, reputation was currency. If Eric dragged mine through the mud, even if I kept the shop, it wouldn't matter. Nobody would trust me to fix a flat tire, much less their car. I hung up the phone with a pit in my stomach. I wasn't just fighting for a business or a house. I was fighting for my name, and Eric wasn't going to pull any punches. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. At first, it was subtle, a cold shoulder at the grocery store, a conversation that stopped the moment I walked into the diner. People who used to wave when they passed the shop now avoided eye contact, suddenly finding their shoes very interesting. In a small town, news spreads like wildfire. But rumors spread like gasoline poured straight onto the flames. I'd overhear things, quiet, sharp-edged things. Can you believe Mark would do that to his own brother? Poor Eric, cut out of everything. And after all he's done for that family. I heard Mark changed the will behind his father's back while he was sick. None of it was true. But truth doesn't matter much when a good story gets going, especially when it's the kind of story that feeds people's love for a little drama. Eric, of course, played the part perfectly. He'd show up at the local bar, all sad smiles and hangdog expressions, telling anyone who'd listen how devastated he was by the betrayal. He made himself the victim, the prodigal son, cast aside by his scheming little brother. And people bought it. I tried to keep my head down, focus on the work. But it's hard to fix engines when the customers stop showing up. The shop, once steady and busy, turned into a ghost town overnight. No cars pulling into the lot, no calls for oil changes or brake jobs, just the sound of my own heartbeat, loud in the emptiness. Worse, suppliers started hesitating too. Vendors who had worked with Dad for years suddenly lost invoices or forgot to process orders. Banks started asking for paperwork twice. Insurance agents called for routine reviews that somehow led to threats of policy cancellations. It was death by 1,000 paper cuts. Eric wasn't just attacking my inheritance, he was choking the life out of it inch by inch until there'd be nothing left for me to fight for. I could feel it slipping through my fingers, this thing Dad had trusted me to protect. And that's when I realized, if I didn't fight back, not just legally, but strategically, Eric was going to win. Not because he was right, but because he was louder. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, it did. One rainy Tuesday morning, I got a knock at the door. A courier, clipboard in hand, no smile, no small talk. He handed me an envelope, turned on his heel, and disappeared down the steps without so much as a glance back. Inside, a copy of a new will, supposedly signed by Dad just 2 months before he passed. And in this one, guess what? Everything, the shop, the house, the land, was left to Eric. At first I thought it was some kind of sick joke. Dad had been barely able to hold a pen by then. He couldn't even sign his own checks, much less draft and notarize a brand new will. But there it was, in neat, perfect, suspiciously perfect, sitting in my hands. I ran my fingers over the paper, feeling the fury rise in my chest like a storm surge. It was the same notary who had done Dad's original will, or so it claimed, but something felt off. Too clean, too convenient. And worse, it was enough to muddy the waters even more. Even if I could prove the original will was valid, this new document gave Eric ammunition, a way to throw doubt into the case, to drag things out in court for months, maybe years. I called Mr. Henley immediately. He sighed when I told him. "It's a forgery," he said without hesitation. "But proving it will take time. Handwriting experts, forensic document examiners, it's not going to be cheap." I didn't care about the cost. This wasn't about money anymore. It was about defending Dad's name, and mine. Eric had crossed a line. He wasn't just trying to steal the business. He was willing to rewrite history, to lie about the man who raised us, just to get what he thought he deserved. And that's when it hit me. Eric wasn't fighting for the shop. He didn't care about Dad's legacy or the family name. He was fighting for himself, for the image he couldn't let go of, the golden boy, the favorite son. He needed to win, not for the money, but for the story he told himself every time he looked in the mirror. But if Eric thought he was the only one who could play dirty, he had no idea who he was dealing with. I wasn't just going to defend what was mine. I was going to expose him for everything he really was. I sat at the kitchen table that night, the fake will spread out in front of me like some twisted puzzle. Eric had always been sloppy. He thought charm and bluster could cover up his shortcuts, but paper trails don't lie, and neither did the gut feeling twisting in my stomach. I needed proof, solid proof. The first person I called was Mr. Henley. He referred me to a forensic document examiner, a guy named Sam Bennett, retired FBI. Sam's voice was calm and steady, the kind of voice that makes you feel like you're not crazy, even when your world is falling apart. "Bring me everything," he said. "Original documents, copies, any samples of your dad's handwriting. We'll see what we can find." I spent the next 2 days digging through old boxes, bank statements, birthday cards, handwritten notes Dad had left taped to the fridge, reminding me to change the oil or pick up milk. All of it went to Sam. While he worked on the forgery angle, I started digging on my own. I wasn't just looking for holes in Eric's story, I was looking for leverage, and leverage in a small town isn't hard to find if you know where to look. Eric had always been reckless with money. Fast cars, fast friends, bad bets. I figured if he was desperate enough to forge a will, he was desperate enough to have left a trail somewhere. I reached out to an old friend from high school, Tyler, who worked at a local bank. I didn't even have to ask directly. Tyler just shook his head and said, "Eric's been in and out of here for months trying to get loans, got denied everywhere. Word is he's underwater with some not-so-nice people." That explained a lot. Debt makes people do crazy things. Digging deeper, I found even more. Unpaid bills, gambling markers, bounced checks. Eric wasn't just broke, he was drowning, and he was betting on my inheritance to pull him out. Meanwhile, Sam got back to me with his findings. "The signatures don't match," he said, straight to the point. "The strokes are too smooth. Your dad's hand was shaking badly in his last months. I compared it to the notes you gave me. No way he signed this clean. Plus, the notary didn't renew her license last year. She wasn't even legally able to notarize anything at that time. It was all unraveling, thread by thread. But knowing the truth and proving it in a courtroom are two different things. I needed more, something that couldn't be explained away or buried under legal technicalities. And then, like a crack of thunder on a clear day, I remembered something. Dad's journal. He'd kept one for years, a battered old notebook he always tucked away in his nightstand. If it was still there, it might just be the lifeline I needed. I hadn't touched Dad's bedroom since the day he passed. The door stayed shut like a vault, keeping the memories in, and maybe keeping me out. But now, standing in the dim hallway with my hand on the knob, I knew there was no avoiding it. The room smelled faintly of aftershave and old leather. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, painting stripes across the worn carpet. Everything was just how he'd left it. The neatly made bed, the reading glasses on the nightstand, the watch he never went a day without. I crossed the room slowly, my heart hammering in my chest, and pulled open the nightstand drawer. There it was. A beat-up black leather notebook, edges frayed, cover cracked from years of handling. Dad's journal. I sat down on the edge of the bed and flipped it open, my hands shaking a little. The first pages were filled with notes about the shop, oil change records, parts orders, schedules. But as I turned the pages, the entries became more personal. Dates, observations, thoughts he'd never shared out loud. Mark's been holding the shop together. I don't tell him enough, but I'm proud. Eric came by again today asking for money. Didn't even bother to ask how I was feeling. Mark's got the heart for this. Eric's chasing dreams that don't belong to him. The further I read, the clearer it became. Dad saw everything. The late nights I spent helping at the shop. The sacrifices Eric never made. The lies Eric told himself and everyone else. Then, an entry dated just a month before Dad died. I need to make sure Mark's protected. Eric's not fit to run the shop. Not because he's a bad person, but because he won't take care of it. I've arranged the will accordingly. If Eric fights it, well, I'm not surprised. My throat tightened, and tucked into the back cover, folded neatly, was a letter, sealed in an envelope with my name written on it in Dad's steady hand. I broke the seal carefully and pulled out the note. "Mark, if you're reading this, It means things didn't go the way I hoped. I trust you to do what's right. Remember, integrity is what you do when no one's watching. I'm proud of you, always have been. Don't let Eric's mistakes become your burden." I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap, the weight of Dad's words heavier than any court ruling could ever be. This journal wasn't just a record, it was my ace in the hole. Proof, not just of Dad's intentions, but of Eric's pattern, his history, his real character. And with this in my hands, I knew one thing for sure. Eric wasn't going to steal this from me. Not now, not ever. The next few days I barely slept. I wasn't just preparing for a legal battle anymore, I was preparing for a war. With the journal and the forged will in hand, I met again with Mr. Henley. He flipped through the pages slowly, nodding with that same grim expression he'd worn at Dad's funeral. "This changes everything," he said finally. "This isn't just about the will now. This is about character, about motive." He explained that courts don't just look at documents, they look at patterns of behavior, credibility, the story behind the story, and Dad's journal told a story that couldn't be faked. But I wasn't stopping there. I needed to make sure Eric couldn't slither his way out of this, no matter how many lies he stacked up. I hired a private investigator, a guy named Jack O'Brien, an old-school type who didn't mind getting his hands a little dirty. Within a week, Jack uncovered a treasure trove of Eric's secrets. Turns out Eric's financial situation was even worse than I thought. Credit card debt up to his eyeballs, gambling losses that would make a bookie blush, sketchy business deals that had gone belly up. And the real kicker, he had been quietly trying to sell the shop behind my back, even before Dad passed. Emails, signed agreements, even a deposit from a real estate developer who planned to bulldoze the shop and turn it into a strip mall. Eric had never wanted to run Dad's business. He wanted to cash it in and move on, and when Dad didn't hand him the keys, Eric's plan B was simple: take it by force or by fraud. The deeper we dug, the uglier it got. Jack found records of Eric visiting the notary listed on the forged will, a woman named Sandra Boyle. At a time she was no longer licensed to practice. It was all there, the motive, the method, the desperation. I wasn't dealing with a brother who made a mistake. I was dealing with a man who was willing to burn his own family to the ground just to save himself from the hole he'd dug. The realization stung more than I wanted to admit, because no matter how bad Eric was, there was a part of me, the little brother part, that still remembered looking up to him, still wanted to believe he could be better. But those days were gone. Now it was about survival, and if Eric wanted a fight, I was finally ready to give him one. With everything we had, the journal, the letter, the forged will analysis, the dirt Jack dug up, it was time to put together a plan. Not just any plan, a bulletproof one. Mr. Henley called in some favors and brought on an aggressive litigator, a woman named Rachel Keene. Rachel had a reputation for being calm, ruthless, and allergic to losing. She didn't care about small-town gossip or Eric's golden boy charm. She cared about facts. Rachel spent a whole afternoon going through the evidence we'd collected. She didn't say much, just scribbled notes and nodded occasionally. When she finally spoke, it was with the kind of quiet certainty that makes you sit up straight. "We're not just going to defend the will," she said. "We're going to dismantle Eric." She outlined the strategy: file a countersuit for fraud and forgery, subpoena Eric's financial records to expose his motive, bring in handwriting experts, and, the real dagger, submit Dad's journal and letter into evidence to show clear, consistent intent. But she wasn't done. "We're also filing a motion to have the forged will declared fraudulent," she said. "If the court agrees, Eric could face criminal charges. At minimum, he'll lose any right to contest the estate again." I felt a knot loosen in my chest for the first time in weeks. This wasn't just defense, it was offense. Rachel also suggested something else: silence. No arguing with Eric, no confrontations, no warnings. Let him believe he was winning, right up until we pulled the rug out from under him. So that's exactly what I did. I stopped responding to Eric's texts and calls. When he came by the shop trying to bait me into a fight, I kept my answers short and polite. When he smirked at me at the diner or made snide comments around town, I smiled and said nothing. I let him think I was beaten, that he had me right where he wanted me. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, Rachel was setting the trap. We filed the countersuit. We submitted the journal and the letter. We had Sam's forensic report ready. We had Jack's files, copies of Eric's emails trying to sell the shop, and financial statements that painted a very different picture of the golden boy. When the court date finally came through, Rachel looked at me across the conference table, her eyes sharp. "This is where we see if Eric's been playing checkers while we've been playing chess." I sat back in my chair and nodded. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid. I was ready. The courthouse was a squat, no-frills building, the kind of place where parking tickets and family feuds got settled under the same roof. But for me, walking through those heavy double doors that morning felt like marching into battle. Eric was already there, lounging in a cheap suit that didn't quite hide the nervous tapping of his foot. He gave me a smirk as I walked by, that same smug grin he used to wear when he scored touchdowns in high school, like the game was already won. I didn't even blink. Rachel was all business. She didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk, just laid out our documents on the table, methodical and deadly calm. Across from us, Eric's lawyer, some slick guy from out of town, shuffled his papers with the kind of jittery energy that told me he already knew this wasn't going to go the way they hoped. When the judge entered, a no-nonsense woman with a reputation for cutting through drama like a buzzsaw, the room snapped to attention. Eric's side went first, presenting their case. The so-called new will, the sob story about how Dad had been confused and manipulated. They talked about family loyalty, fairness, brotherly love, painting Eric as the wronged son who was simply trying to honor his father's true intentions. I kept my face blank, but inside, I could barely contain my anger. Then it was our turn. Rachel stood up, calm and steady, and went to work. First, the forensic report, detailed, technical, undeniable. The signature on the new will was a forgery. The notary's license had expired. No gray area. No maybe. Next, Dad's journal. She read aloud key entries, the ones where Dad praised my dedication, where he expressed doubts about Eric's judgment, where he clearly laid out his plans for the business and the house. The courtroom was dead silent. And then, the final blow, the letter Dad wrote to me, sealed and untouched until now. Rachel handed it to the judge, who read it silently, her face unreadable. Finally, Rachel introduced Jack's findings, Eric's mountain of debt, his secret meetings with developers, the email trails showing he had tried to sell the shop behind Dad's back even before the funeral. By the time Rachel finished, the air in the room was thick, the kind of thick you get right before a thunderstorm breaks. The judge leaned forward, her hands folded neatly on the bench. "Mr. Eric," she said, her voice sharp but controlled, "you have not only failed to prove undue influence, but the evidence strongly suggests intentional fraud and forgery. I find the original will valid and enforceable. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the district attorney for potential criminal investigation into the fraudulent will submission." Eric's face turned the color of wet cement. His mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I just sat there steady as bedrock while the world shifted around us. The golden boy had finally fallen, and the best part? He never even saw it coming. As we walked out of the courtroom, the weight I'd been carrying for months finally started to lift. Eric, on the other hand, looked like he had the wind knocked out of him. He didn't say a word, didn't even look in my direction. His lawyer packed up their papers in silence, avoiding eye contact like a kid caught cheating on a test. Outside, the sky was overcast, but to me it felt like sunshine. Rachel clapped me on the back, a small rare gesture from someone who wasn't big on celebration. That, she said, was a clean knockout. It wasn't just that the judge had upheld Dad's original will. It was the fact that Eric had been exposed, not just legally but publicly. The golden boy image shattered. Word spread fast. By the time I got back to the shop, customers who hadn't set foot there in months were already pulling into the lot. Old friends dropped by, shaking my hand, clapping me on the shoulder, saying they always knew I was the real deal. Funny how loyalty returns once the dust settles. But I didn't care about their approval anymore. This wasn't about them. It was about Dad. About honoring the man who had taught me the value of integrity, even when it wasn't easy, especially when it wasn't easy. In the weeks that followed, things got even better. Eric's financial house of cards collapsed. The DA moved forward with an investigation into the forged will. He faced charges for fraud and forgery, and though he avoided jail time with a plea deal, he was left broke, disgraced, and alone. He tried to reach out once, a text message at 2 in the morning. "Can we talk?" I didn't respond. Some bridges aren't worth rebuilding. Some bridges need to stay burned so you don't wander back across them. Instead, I threw myself into the shop, hired a couple of young apprentices, repainted the old sign, launched a website, nothing fancy, but enough to get the word out that Michael's Auto Repair was back, and better than ever. Every time I walked into that place, it felt different now, lighter, like Dad was there in every tool, every oil-stained rag, every satisfied customer. I didn't just win a legal battle, I reclaimed a legacy, and standing there, grease on my hands, sun on my face, the sound of engines humming in the background, I finally understood what Dad meant all those years ago. Family isn't about blood. It's about who shows up when it matters. And me? I showed up. Life after the storm wasn't perfect, but it was mine. Some mornings I'd sit on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun come up over the town, and think about everything that had happened, the betrayal, the lies, the fight, and the win. Eric eventually left town. Last I heard, he was working odd jobs a few counties over, trying to put his life back together. I didn't wish him harm, but I didn't wish him back either. Some things once broken can't and shouldn't be repaired. The shop grew busier than ever. Word spread about what happened, and people respected that I stood my ground. Not just customers, but neighbors, old friends, even folks who doubted me at first. There's something powerful about quiet persistence. About showing up every day, doing the work, and letting actions speak where words once failed. A few months later, I found myself sitting at Dad's old desk, the same one where he taught me how to balance a ledger and change a carburetor. His journal was there, a little more worn now, but still a beacon. I opened it and added a final entry of my own. Legacy isn't something you inherit. It's something you protect. I closed the book, feeling a sense of peace settle over me. This wasn't just about winning a court case or holding onto a piece of property. It was about standing up when it mattered most, about honoring the sacrifices that came before me, about proving, maybe to everyone, but mostly to myself, that I was worthy of carrying it all forward. Because at the end of the day, names fade, money runs out, and reputations change with the wind. But character? Character is what stays behind when the lights go out and the crowd goes home. Character is the real inheritance. If you've ever had to fight for something you believed in, something you knew was yours, tell me your story in the comments. I'd love to hear how you found the strength to stand your ground when no one else believed you could. And if you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more real stories like this, and share this video with someone who might need a little reminder. Sometimes the battle is ugly, but the victory is beautiful. Thanks for listening.